Have you noticed how some people seem to have an almost supernatural control over their environment without saying a word? They don't shout, they don't beg, they simply withdraw, and suddenly everything changes. The energy shifts. People start questioning, pursuing, feeling. Now imagine if you did the same thing, if you stopped immediately reacting to everything, if you chose silence instead of the automatic response. This is the secret that will forever change the way you relate to others. What you're about to discover is a psychological technique so powerful that it can literally make anyone become obsessed with you without them even realizing what's happening. And no, this isn't about cheap manipulation or superficial tricks. It's about understanding human psychology at such a deep level that it will allow you to create magnetic attraction simply by controlling your emotional availability. Think about the last time you felt irresistibly attracted to someone. Was it because that person was always available, always responding to your messages instantly, always pleasing you? Or was it rather the opposite? Someone whose attention you had to earn, someone who seemed to have a complete and interesting world beyond you. You've been taught to always be present, to respond quickly, to please, to say yes even when you wanted to say no. Since childhood, you've been conditioned to believe that your value lies in how available you are to others. But here's a truth that perhaps no one has told you with this clarity. This excessive availability is not a virtue. It's a prison. And as long as you keep thinking that you need to be accessible all the time, emotionally or physically, you will be manipulated, exhausted, and forgotten as soon as you're no longer useful. Do you know why? Because always being available makes you seem predictable, and everything predictable loses value. People start using you like an emotional emergency button. They press it when they want attention, relief, validation, and then they put you back on the shelf. As Neil Strauss said, attraction is not a choice, it's a biological response to your perceived value. And when your perceived value decreases because you're too available, attraction fades. Think of it this way. What's more valuable? A diamond you can find in any corner store, or one so rare that it only exists in one place in the world? Scarcity creates value. And your emotional presence, your attention, your energy are precious resources that you should distribute carefully. Right now, stop and ask yourself, how many people do you respond to immediately when they write to you? How many times have you cancelled your own plans to accommodate someone else? How often do you find yourself explaining your decisions, justifying your actions, trying to make everyone understand your point of view? Do this quick exercise. The next time someone asks you for something, wait 24 hours before responding. Just 24 hours. Observe what happens, how they react. Also observe how you feel. The anxiety that arises, the fear of disappointing, the fear of losing the connection. All of that is social programming that keeps you in the cycle of excessive availability. When you learn to master your own availability, you'll see how the dynamics change in your favor. And that's what we'll talk about in the next point. The more available you are, the less value others give you. Because what is too abundant becomes a cheap resource. Nobody respects what they don't have to earn. Nobody values what is always there. It's the paradox of human attraction. We want what we can't easily have. Neil Strauss understood this perfectly when he said, "Indifference is not the antithesis of love. It's its prerequisite." We're not talking about being cold or cruel. We're talking about creating a psychological space where the other person has to invest, has to earn your attention and your energy. The strategic emotional vacuum technique works because it activates one of the most basic human impulses, the fear of loss. When you suddenly stop being completely available to someone who was used to always having you there, a vacuum is created. And human nature abhors a vacuum. They will try to fill it. They will try to regain your attention. Think about that relationship where you're always the one who writes first, who proposes plans, who makes sure everything is okay. What do you think would happen if suddenly you stopped doing it? Not out of revenge, not as a game, but as a conscious act of valuing your own energy. At first, they may not notice the change, but after a while they'll start wondering, where are they? Why haven't they written? Did I do something wrong? And that's when the dynamic changes. You're no longer the pursuer, you become the pursued. Has it ever happened to you that someone who normally doesn't pay much attention to you suddenly starts looking for you when you stop being available? It's not a coincidence. It's basic psychology. We value more what we believe we could lose. Here's a practical exercise. Identify 3 people in your life with whom you feel you're always giving more than you receive. For the next 2 weeks, gradually reduce your availability. Don't respond immediately. Don't always be available to help. Don't be the first to initiate conversations. Observe how the dynamic changes. Take mental notes of their reactions. Remember, this isn't about playing with people's emotions, it's about rebalancing the energy scale of your relationships. As Neil Strauss would say, sometimes you have to walk away for them to miss you. Now, when you start controlling your availability, something fascinating happens in the other person's mind. And that psychological process is exactly what we'll explore next. Every time you react impulsively, you're wasting psychic energy. When you defend yourself against criticism that didn't even deserve attention, when you respond to provocation just to prove you're right, when you engage in useless discussions, when you try to please those who don't value you, you're spending your inner strength on what doesn't nourish you. Neil Strauss points out that what you resist persists. The more you react, the more you get tied up. People who live emotionally exhausted aren't weak, they're misdirected. And do you know what happens to someone who lives exhausted? They become vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable, you become easy prey. Manipulative, opportunistic, and emotionally needy people can sense this. They notice that you don't know how to guard your energy, that you react to everything, that you're always trying to solve the world, and they take advantage of it. Think about that person who always makes you feel drained after interacting with them. It's not because they're inherently bad. It's because you've allowed them to drain your energy without limits. You haven't established clear boundaries. A healthy psyche is one that knows how to keep energy within the system. This means knowing how to say no without guilt, knowing how to remain silent without feeling cowardly, knowing how to observe before acting. Because true power isn't in reacting. It's in choosing when and how to act. How many times have you lost sleep over an unresolved conversation? How many times have you spent hours ruminating about what you should have said or trying to understand why someone treated you badly? This is energy that drains without return. You're keeping alive ghosts that should have died long ago and feeding dynamics that only exist because you insist on responding. Do this exercise right now. Close your eyes for a moment and visualize your energy as a bright light inside you. Each time you react impulsively, a bit of that light escapes. Now imagine that you build a shield around that light. A shield that allows you to consciously choose when to share your energy and with whom. Feel the difference. That feeling of control, of inner power. That's what we're seeking to cultivate. Psychic energy is like a force field. When it's well guarded, it creates presence. You enter a room and command respect without saying a word. But when it's poorly managed, you become invisible, reactive, fragile, and the world has no mercy for those who yield easily. Start observing your own triggers. What makes you react automatically? What makes you lose your center? These are exactly the points where your energy escapes, and that's where you need to work. Not to become cold or indifferent, but to be selective, to be sovereign over yourself. If you've followed along so far, you're probably already feeling a shift in your perspective. You're beginning to see your social interactions in a new light. And that brings us to the next crucial point: how silent manipulation may be operating in your life without you noticing. You think you're in control. You believe your reactions are conscious choices. But the truth is darker. Most of your emotional responses are programmed. And those who understand this manipulate you easily. Opportunistic people don't need to raise their voice, threaten, or force situations. They simply activate the buttons you've left exposed, and you react automatically. Neil Strauss calls this emotional social engineering, the ability to predict and provoke emotional responses in others based on observable patterns. You know that friend who only approaches when they're in crisis, that partner who always needs you to save the day, that person who praises you, but only while you're useful to them. None of this is a coincidence. They're not relating to you. They're relating to the idea of you. to the role you accept playing. And why do you accept it? Because you're afraid of disappointing, afraid of not being loved, afraid of being abandoned. The most effective manipulation doesn't occur in shouting. It occurs in the silence of guilt. When you feel you owe something to the other, when you believe you need to be available, need to help, need to understand, even when it destroys you inside. And here's the central point. The manipulator doesn't need to control you. They just need you to keep reacting in the same way. But when you stop reacting, the game breaks. Repeat after me. My energy is valuable. My time is valuable. My attention is valuable. And I decide who I give them to. When you start saying no, responding with silence, withdrawing instead of explaining yourself, the projections begin to crumble. The mask they put on you falls. And this leaves people disconcerted because they no longer know who you are. And worse yet, now they're forced to look at themselves. And not everyone is prepared for that. Your unavailability is a threat because it forces others to confront their own emptiness. The silence you offer reveals the internal noise they don't want to hear. And then comes the attack, the criticism, the emotional drama. Not because you're wrong, but because you stopped serving as a convenient mirror. Neil Strauss said, "We don't enlighten ourselves by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." When you withdraw, when you stop feeding the cycle, the shadow of the other begins to emerge. And this is unbearable for those who have always used you as an escape. But what about you? Are you ready to deal with the discomfort of being misunderstood, rejected, or even attacked for protecting yourself? Are you ready to endure the silence that comes after the rupture? Because it's precisely in that silence where a new kind of power is born. And this power is exactly what we're going to talk about now. The modern world is noisy. Everyone wants to be heard, wants to respond quickly, wants to win meaningless debates and prove their point, even if it costs them their own peace. But there's a power that few know, and even fewer master. The power of silence. Not the silence of passivity or cowardice, but conscious, strategic, brutally lucid silence. The kind of silence that isn't absence but amplified presence. Neil Strauss discovered that silence, well used, can be the most powerful persuasion tool that exists. When you stop reacting, you start observing. And by observing, you see patterns that previously went unnoticed. Emotional repetitions, manipulation games, self-sabotage cycles. Silence allows lucidity, and lucidity is dangerous for those who live to control you. Have you noticed how some people panic when you don't respond, when you don't explain yourself, when you simply disappear? It's not because they miss you. It's because your silence takes away their narrative control. While you talk, you're still in the game, but when you're silent, you change the rules, and that unbalances anyone who thrives on your reaction. True silence isn't the absence of voice. It's dominion over one's own energy. It's the refusal to be dragged by another person's emotions. It's the conscious choice not to participate in battles that aren't worth your wear and tear. Try this exercise. The next time someone tries to provoke you emotionally, be it with a cutting comment, an unfair criticism, or an unreasonable demand, don't respond. Just look, observe, breathe, keep your center. You'll feel an almost irresistible impulse to defend yourself, to explain, to counterattack. Resist that impulse. Maintain your silence and observe what happens. Most times the other person will start feeling uncomfortable. They'll start filling the void with more words, more explanations, more attacks. And with each word they utter, they reveal more about themselves than anything you could have said. Neil Strauss explains it this way: silence is the only language that manipulators don't know how to speak. When you refuse to enter their game, they lose power over you. But don't fool yourself. Silence has a price. It will distance you from people who only valued you for the role you played. It will make you incomprehensible to those who only saw you through their own projections. It will make you seem cold, distant, arrogant. But all of this is a reaction from those who never wanted to deal with your depth, only with your utility. And here's the hard truth: the more you mature, the more selective you become with your words, because you understand that each phrase is an energetic investment, and not everyone deserves access to your truth. Sometimes silence isn't withdrawal, it's sovereignty. It's the language of those who no longer need to prove anything to anyone. Silence is uncomfortable because it forces the other to deal with their own thoughts, with their own internal noise. And this discomfort reveals more about them than any argument of yours could reveal. You don't need to explain your absence. It explains itself. And those who feel threatened by it reveal how much they depended on your imbalance to maintain their own control. If you've connected with what we've discussed so far, it's time to move on to practical application. Because it's no use understanding all this intellectually if in practice you continue saying yes when you want to say no, responding to messages that bother you, participating in empty conversations, and maintaining relationships that only exist through inertia. Awareness without action is just another form of self-deception. True transformation begins when you firmly decide to become selective. And this requires emotional discipline. Conscious unavailability isn't about being cold, arrogant, or indifferent. It's about no longer being accessible to anyone at any time for any reason. It's about taking control of your own energy, your own time, your own peace. And this begins with small actions, not responding immediately, breathing before reacting, abandoning a discussion before being dragged into chaos, turning off your phone without guilt, saying no today, saying I'm not interested, saying I won't get involved. But here's the most important part. You don't need to justify your absence. You don't need to explain your silence. You don't owe anything to anyone but yourself. And this, for many people, is unforgivable, because when you refuse to explain yourself, you take away the other's power to keep you within an emotional narrative where you're always the helpful, understanding, accessible one. Neil Strauss understood that every process of personal growth passes through isolation, but not a depressive isolation, a sacred isolation, a time of inner retreat where you relearn to listen to your own voice without the interference of the world, where you rebuild your identity, not based on the gaze of others but from your own center. Do you want to know a good thermometer for your evolution? Observe who starts distancing themselves from you when you become more reserved. Observe who tries to provoke you when you stop reacting. Observe who accuses you of having changed when you finally start protecting yourself. These aren't signs that you're wrong. They're proof that you've begun to free yourself. Do this exercise now. Identify 3 recent situations where you yielded to someone or something against your true desire. Write them down. Then, write how you would have handled those situations if you had practiced conscious unavailability. What would you have said? Or what would you have stopped saying? How would you have felt? Use these reflections as a roadmap for your future interactions. Being unavailable is uncomfortable at first. You'll feel guilty. You'll think you're being selfish. You'll hear that you're being too harsh. But this is part of the deconstruction process. You've spent your life being conditioned to put yourself second. It's natural for change to cause discomfort, not only in you but in all those who benefited from your old version. Conscious unavailability is the foundation of self-determination. When you say no to the world, you're saying yes to yourself. When you withdraw from a toxic environment, you're reaffirming that your peace is worth more than any false connection. And when you stop explaining yourself, you begin to be respected, even if it's by few. But not everyone is ready for this kind of presence because your emotional absence will expose wounds they don't want to face. It will reveal how much they depended on your emotional chaos to feel in control. And it's at this moment that the rupture comes. And with the rupture comes pain, loneliness, distancing, the feeling that you're losing something, when in reality, you're just liberating yourself. And this brings us to the culminating point of our conversation, the rebirth that emerges from silence. When you stop being available to everyone, something profound begins to happen. First comes the silence, an uncomfortable silence that seems to scream inside you. You wonder if you did the right thing, if you're being too harsh, if you're losing people you liked. But gradually, this silence transforms. It begins to cleanse, to calm, to heal. And then comes the solitude, but not the solitude of absence. It's the solitude of total presence, your own, the solitude of the strong, the solitude of one who no longer betrays themselves to keep others close. And in that space where once there was confusion, clarity enters. Where once there was anxiety, peace enters. Where once there was need, a new kind of strength enters. The strength of being complete within yourself. Neil Strauss discovered this during his own transformation journey. He said, "The process of becoming who you really are requires that you distance yourself from the collective, that you disidentify from the mask, that you walk alone for a time." And that's exactly what you're doing when you decide to become unavailable. You're not running away from the world, you're returning to yourself. It's at this point that you stop being a reactor and become a creator. You stop being shaped by circumstances and begin to shape your reality from within. And something magical happens. People begin to obsess over you. Not because you're playing games, not because you're manipulating, but because you've become a rarity. In a world where everyone seeks attention, you no longer need it. In a sea of people who sell themselves, you've become invaluable simply by being selective with your energy. People who feel uncomfortable with your absence reveal that they never wanted you. They wanted the role you played, and now that you no longer fit, they don't know what to do with you. And that's liberating. You'll lose people, but you'll find yourself. You'll distance yourself from places, but you'll reconnect with your essence. You'll become misunderstood, but finally, you'll begin to be respected, because when you're no longer available for anything, you become valuable, rare, unforgettable. And don't fool yourself, this is a rebirth, a new beginning, the start of a life where you're no longer available for emotional crumbs, for mind games, for voids disguised as affection. Now you only accept what resonates with your peace, with your truth, with your integrity. Truly extraordinary people, those who leave a mark, those with whom others become obsessed, are those who have mastered the art of conscious unavailability. Not because they want to manipulate, but because they respect themselves enough not to give themselves to just anyone. Neil Strauss understood this when he said, "The best way to make someone desire you is not by making yourself desirable, but by being unattainable." But here's the deeper truth: you don't do it so they desire you. You do it because you've become someone who no longer needs external validation to feel complete. And it's precisely this completeness that is magnetic. People obsess over those who don't need to be pursued, because in a world of emotional hunger, whoever is satisfied seems to possess a secret that everyone wants to discover. But the secret isn't a trick. It's a transformation. It's the result of having chosen your peace over external approval, of having chosen your integrity over superficial connections, of having chosen yourself when everyone was telling you that was selfish. And if you've made it this far, it's because a part of you is already ready for this new path. A part of you has already understood that being loved means nothing if you have to abandon yourself for it. And that true self-love begins when you choose yourself, even if it costs you being alone for a while. Are you ready to be misunderstood, rejected, or even hated in the name of your inner freedom? Are you willing to pay the price of being yourself? Because in the end, that price is insignificant compared to the cost of living an entire life pleasing others at the expense of your own soul. True transformation isn't a destination. It's a continuous journey of self-discovery, of establishing boundaries, of protecting your energy, and of cultivating relationships that nourish you instead of draining you. And it all begins with a decision. The decision to no longer be available for what diminishes you. Now I want you to write in the comments, "I choose my peace." Let's see how many here are ready for this transition. If this message resonated with you, if you felt it spoke directly to your experience, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more content that will help you transform your relationships and your life from the inside out. And don't forget to hit the bell to not miss any video, because the journey is just beginning, and the person you'll be when you master the art of conscious unavailability is someone the world will want to obsess over, but to whom only a few privileged ones will truly have access.